The heat here is different now, worse than it ever was before the water came. And Miami was already hot enough to make you question why anyone chose to build a city this far south, this close to the equator, this vulnerable to the ocean that's now swallowing it whole. It's not just the temperature, though it regularly hits 115 during the day now, sometimes higher. The concrete and steel and glass that used to make up this city, now acting like a massive solar collector, radiating heat back up from the water that covers everything below the fourth floor. It's the humidity that kills you, this thick, oppressive wetness in the air that makes every breath feel like you're drowning on dry land, makes your clothes stick to your skin within seconds of stepping outside, makes your hair permanently damp and your sheets never quite dry, and your lungs work twice as hard to extract oxygen from air that's more water vapor than actual breathable atmosphere. The smell is what I remember most clearly from those first weeks after the Great Flood peaked in January 2030. This combination of salt and rot and mold that permeates everything, that you can't wash off or escape or get used to no matter how many months you spend breathing it in. The salt comes from the ocean, obviously, from the Atlantic that finally said enough is enough and decided to reclaim the limestone shelf that Miami was built on, the porous rock that was always going to flood eventually, that every scientist warned about for decades while developers kept building higher and more expensive and more luxurious, as if money could hold back the tide. The rot comes from everything organic that didn't make it above the waterline, all the trees and plants and landscaping that made Miami beautiful, all the food and refrigerators and freezers when the power went out, all the bodies of people and pets who didn't evacuate in time, or who tried to wait it out, or who simply had nowhere else to go when the water kept rising and didn't stop when the models said it would. The mold is everywhere, absolutely everywhere, growing on every surface that stays damp, which is every surface because the humidity never drops below 90% and usually hovers closer to 100. Black mold, green mold, white fuzzy mold, orange slimy mold, every variety you can imagine, and probably some that are new mutations adapted to this new permanently flooded environment. It grows on walls and ceilings and floors, on furniture and clothes and skin if you're not careful, on the wooden bridges we've built between buildings, on the tarps we use for shelter, on the fishing lines we drop into the water below.
I've seen people die from mold infections, watched their lungs slowly fill with fungus until they couldn't breathe anymore, watched their skin break out in lesions that wouldn't heal, watched them waste away while the rest of us tried everything we could think of to help, and nothing worked, because there are no hospitals anymore, no doctors, no antibiotics, no medical infrastructure at all except what we can improvise from the supplies we scavenged before they went bad or got too waterlogged to use. It's not just water down there. That's the thing people need to understand. It's not like the ocean came in clean and clear and turned Miami into some tropical paradise where you can swim and fish and live some kind of post-apocalyptic beach lifestyle. It's a toxic swamp, a stagnant, festering soup of seawater mixed with sewage from broken pipes, oil and gasoline from submerged cars and boats, chemicals from flooded homes and businesses and industrial sites, runoff from every terrible thing humans stored at ground level, assuming it would stay dry forever. The water is brown most days, sometimes black, occasionally green with algae blooms that use up all the oxygen and kill everything living in it. You can't swim in it without getting sick, can't drink it, obviously, can't even touch it without worrying about infections. We've lost people who fell in, not from drowning, but from the infections they got from cuts and scrapes exposed to that poisonous water. Bacteria and parasites we don't have names for, eating their flesh faster than we could treat it with our limited supplies. Ocean Drive is a river now, a wide brown channel flowing between buildings that used to be the most expensive real estate in America, maybe in the world. I remember what it looked like before. Remember walking down that street on New Year's Eve, watching fireworks over the beach. Remember the Art Deco hotels painted in pastels. Remember the outdoor cafes and the models and the exotic cars parked along the curb, Lamborghinis and Ferraris and Bentleys that cost more than most people make in a lifetime. Those cars are underwater reefs now, 30 feet down, covered in barnacles and algae, homes for fish that swam in from the ocean through streets that are now canals, through neighborhoods that are now dive sites for the few people brave enough or stupid enough to go down there looking for salvage. The first 3 floors of every building are completely submerged, have been since the flood peaked and stabilized at this new normal sea level that's about 40 feet higher than it was in 2025, 40 feet higher than anyone predicted it would be this soon, 40 feet that swallowed not just Miami Beach, but most of downtown Miami, Brickell, Coconut Grove, Coral Gables, everywhere that was low-lying and close to the water, which was most of the city.
We live on rooftops now. Those of us who stayed or who couldn't leave or who had nowhere else to go when the evacuation orders came and the highways jammed and the airports closed and the last boats left without us. The tops of skyscrapers have become our ground floor, our new sea level, the baseline from which we measure our survival. I'm on the roof of what used to be a luxury condo tower in Brickell, 23 stories up, which means I've got about 100 feet of clearance above the current waterline, enough to feel relatively safe from the daily fluctuations, the tides that still rise and fall, even though they're doing it 40 feet higher than they used to. There are 47 of us in this tower, down from over 200 when we first gathered here in those chaotic early weeks, back when we still thought this might be temporary, back when we believed the government would come back for us, back when we had hope that the water would recede and life would return to some version of normal. The rooftop has become a small village, an improvised community that looks like something from a disaster movie, except it's real and it's permanent, and there's no dramatic rescue coming to save us. We've built shelters using materials scavenged from the floors below, dragging up doors and furniture and anything we could use before those levels flooded completely. Tarps and plastic sheeting stretched over wooden frames provide shade and shelter from rain, though calling it shelter is generous when the wind can tear it apart and the sun bakes you even in the shade, and the rain, when it comes, is often acidic from atmospheric pollution and makes your skin itch if you're not careful. We've set up a rainwater collection system, every container we could find positioned to catch precipitation, funneling it into barrels and tanks and anything that can hold liquid, because rainwater is our only source of fresh water now that the municipal system failed and the aquifers are contaminated with saltwater intrusion. We fish from the balconies of the upper floors, the ones just above the waterline, using lines and nets we've made from whatever we could find, catching species that swam in from the ocean or that adapted to this new brackish environment. The fishing is good, actually, surprisingly good. The submerged city has created artificial reef habitat that attracts marine life, and we've learned which species are safe to eat and which have been contaminated by the toxic water, which contain too much mercury or other heavy metals, which carry parasites that will make you sick even if you cook them thoroughly. We smoke and salt the fish we catch, trying to preserve them because we never know when the fishing will be bad, when the waters will be too rough or too polluted or just mysteriously empty the way they sometimes are for days at a time.
The wooden bridges we've built between buildings are maybe the most impressive achievement of our new society. These rickety, suspended walkways that let us move between towers without having to go down into the water, that connect our rooftop community to other rooftop communities, that create a network of aerial pathways where the street grid used to be. We built them using lumber and materials from the upper floors, tearing apart walls and furniture and anything wooden, lashing it together with rope and cable and wire, stretching spans of 50 or 60 or sometimes 100 feet across gaps between buildings. They sway when you walk on them, bounce and creak and make you very aware that you're walking on something improvised 20 stories above poisonous water, that one wrong step or one rotten board or one frayed rope could send you plunging down into the toxic soup below. We've lost people from falls, watched them drop screaming into the water, watched them surface thrashing and then disappear again, and we couldn't help them because by the time we could get down there safely they were already gone, already dead from impact or drowning or the rapid infections that kill you within hours of exposure to that contaminated water. The bridges connect us to the tower next door, where another 50 people have set up their community, and to the one beyond that, and eventually to maybe a dozen other buildings within walking distance, creating a neighborhood in the sky, a network of survivors who trade and communicate and help each other survive. We barter fish for medicine, fresh water for tools, information for food, creating an economy based on what we can produce or scavenge or provide to each other. There's a woman in the tower to the east who was a nurse before, who still has some medical supplies and knowledge, and we bring her food in exchange for treating our injuries and illnesses as best she can with what she has. There's a group in the tower to the south who figured out how to grow vegetables in containers using salvaged soil and seeds, producing tomatoes and peppers and herbs that add precious variety to our fish-heavy diet. There's a man in the tower to the north who was an engineer who helps us maintain and improve our structures, who calculates loads and stresses and tells us when a bridge is getting too dangerous to use. But the worst sound, the sound that haunts my dreams and wakes me up in the middle of the night, is the sound of buildings dying. The groan of steel and concrete as saltwater eroded foundations give way, as structural supports corroded by years of immersion in toxic water finally fail, as towers that were built to last 100 years collapse decades early because nobody designed them to sit in corrosive seawater forever.
You can hear it from miles away sometimes.
this low rumbling groan that builds and builds, and then the crash as thousands of tons of building material give way and plunge into the water, creating waves that rock our towers and our boats and threaten our fragile infrastructure. We've watched at least a dozen towers go down since the flood stabilized, seen them crumble in slow motion, or sometimes suddenly, catastrophically, taking everyone inside or on top down with them, erasing entire communities in seconds. The fear of your building collapsing is constant, omnipresent, the background anxiety that colors every decision and every moment. We inspect our tower regularly, send people down into the flooded floors with diving equipment we've improvised, checking for cracks and corrosion and signs of imminent failure. We look for rust stains bleeding from rebar, for concrete that's crumbling or flaking, for steel supports that are thinning as the metal slowly dissolves in salt water. We measure the lean of the tower, checking if it's tilting more than it should, if the foundation is shifting underneath us. We listen for sounds of stress, for creaking and groaning that might indicate something is about to give way. Every storm, every strong wind, every unexplained vibration sends us into alert mode, wondering if this is it, if today's the day our tower joins the others at the bottom of this new toxic sea. The heat makes everything worse, makes every task harder, makes survival a constant grinding effort that wears you down mentally and physically, until you understand why some people just give up, just walk off the edge or dive into the water, or stop eating and drinking and let nature take its course. The sun beats down from a cloudless sky most days, reflecting off the water below, creating this oven effect where you're being cooked from above and below simultaneously. The concrete and steel of the buildings absorb heat all day and radiate it back at night, so there's no real relief even after dark, just slightly less intense suffering. People die from heat stroke regularly, especially the old and the young, and anyone whose health was already compromised. We try to stay in the shade, limit our movement during the hottest hours, wet ourselves with the brackish water to use evaporative cooling, even though it leaves us covered in salt and feeling sticky and gross. The mosquitoes are biblical, swarms of them, clouds so thick you breathe them in, so numerous they coat your skin and your clothes and every exposed surface. They breed in the standing water, obviously, in every container and puddle and corner where water accumulates, multiplying at rates that seem impossible, evolving to be more aggressive and more resistant to whatever measures we try to control them. We've had outbreaks of dengue fever, of malaria, of diseases we don't even have names for, transmitted by mosquitoes that feast on our blood and spread infection through our communities faster than we can contain it. The buzzing is constant, maddening, this high-pitched whine that never stops, and the bites cover every inch of exposed skin, swelling into welts that itch unbearably, that get infected when you scratch them, that sometimes develop into something worse, some systemic infection that kills you over the course of days or weeks. Fresh water is our most precious resource, more valuable than food or medicine or tools, because you can survive for weeks without food, but only days without water. And in this heat and humidity, you dehydrate faster than you can believe possible. We collect rainwater obsessively. Every drop is precious, but rain is unpredictable, and sometimes weeks go by without precipitation, and our supplies dwindle, and we start rationing, and people start getting desperate. We've tried distilling seawater using improvised solar stills, boiling it and collecting the condensation, but it's incredibly inefficient, producing maybe a cup of drinkable water per day per still, not nearly enough to keep everyone hydrated. We've tried filtering the brackish water from below, but it's so contaminated that basic filtration doesn't make it safe. You'd need reverse osmosis or some other advanced purification, and we don't have the equipment or the power to run it. When the water supplies get really low, tensions rise, arguments break out. The thin veneer of civilization that we've maintained starts to crack. People have been killed over water, over a few gallons in a hidden container, over access to a rain barrel, over suspicion that someone was taking more than their share. We've had to establish strict rules and consequences, had to create a system of rationing and monitoring and enforcement, had to become harder than we'd ever wanted to be, because the alternative is chaos, and chaos means death for everyone. Some people have left, taken their chances trying to reach other communities or the evacuation centers that supposedly still operate on higher ground inland, but we rarely hear from them again, and we don't know if they made it or if they died trying, drowned or died from heat stroke, or got sick from the water, or met some other fate we can't imagine.
The luxury of this place, the wealth that used to define Miami, it's all meaningless now, all underwater, all corroding into nothing. The penthouses that sold for $20 million are flooded and abandoned. The Ferraris are artificial reefs. The designer boutiques are full of fish and silt. The nightclubs where celebrities partied are dark and silent, except for the sound of water lapping against submerged dance floors.
Everything that made Miami the magic city, that made it a destination for the wealthy and beautiful and successful, all of it is gone, reclaimed by an ocean that doesn't care about property values or human achievement or the accumulated wealth of generations. The Art Deco hotels are crumbling, their pastel facades eroded by salt spray, their lobbies full of dark water and floating debris, their roofs occupied by survivors who sleep in the same rooms where movie stars once stayed. I think about the warnings we ignored, the scientists who told us this was coming, the reports and projections and computer models that predicted sea level rise, but always with dates that seemed comfortably far in the future, always with caveats about uncertainty and ranges of possibility that led us believe it wouldn't be that bad, wouldn't happen that fast, wouldn't affect us personally. The maps were wrong. That's what I want people to understand. The maps that showed Miami underwater by 2100 or 2150, they were wrong because they were based on assumptions that turned out to be too conservative, too optimistic, too hesitant to predict the worst-case scenario even when the data was pointing toward it. The ice sheets melted faster than expected. The thermal expansion was greater than projected. The feedback loops kicked in sooner and more dramatically than the models predicted, and suddenly, what was supposed to take a century happened in 5 years. I remember the tipping point. Remember when everyone suddenly realized this wasn't a gradual process we could adapt to over decades. This was a catastrophic shift happening in real time. It was September 2028 when the Antarctic ice sheet collapsed, that massive section that had been hanging on by geological threats, that scientists had been monitoring nervously for years. When it went all at once, sliding into the ocean in the span of a week, raising sea levels globally by 3 feet almost overnight. That was when the panic started, when people realized the projections were wrong, when coastal cities around the world started flooding faster than they could evacuate, when governments lost control and social order broke down, and everyone was on their own trying to survive. Miami was already vulnerable, already dealing with sunny day flooding and king tides and saltwater intrusion into the aquifer, already spending billions on pumps and seawalls and elevation projects that bought us a few more years, but couldn't change the fundamental reality that the city was built on porous limestone barely above sea level, in the path of an ocean that was rising and warming and getting more aggressive with every passing year. When the Antarctic ice sheet collapsed, Miami had maybe 6 months before the full effects reached us. 6 months of chaos as people tried to evacuate, as property values collapsed, as the government tried to maintain order while simultaneously abandoning the city to its fate. The Great Flood peaked in January 2030, during what should have been the dry season, during what should have been perfect weather when tourists filled the beaches and boats filled the bay. Instead, we got storm surges driven by winds that seemed angry, that seemed purposeful in their destruction, pushing water higher and higher, flooding neighborhoods that had never flooded before, overwhelming the pumps and the barriers and every defense we'd built. The water came fast, rose 3 feet in a day, then another 2 feet the next day, then stabilized at this new level that was 40 feet above the old normal, 40 feet that put most of Miami underwater permanently, that turned the city into an archipelago of rooftops, connected by bridges and boats and desperation. If you own property near the coast, sell it, now, today, immediately. Don't wait. Don't believe anyone who tells you it will be fine. Don't trust the new projections any more than you should have trusted the old ones. The water is still rising, slower now, but still rising. Another inch this year, another few inches next year, and nobody knows when or if it will stop. The maps were wrong, will always be wrong, because we're in uncharted territory now, because the climate system has been pushed into a state that hasn't existed in millions of years, because feedback loops we didn't fully understand are accelerating changes we didn't think were possible. Coastal real estate is a death trap, a gamble you will lose, an investment that will end underwater, literally and financially. The same thing that happened to Miami is happening or will happen to every coastal city. New York and Los Angeles and London and Tokyo and Shanghai, all of them vulnerable, all of them built on the assumption that the ocean would stay where it was, all of them wrong. I wish I could tell you there's hope, that rescue is coming, that the water will recede, that life will return to normal. But there is no normal anymore. There's only adaptation and survival, and accepting that the world has changed permanently in ways that make our previous lives irrelevant. Miami is gone, not temporarily flooded, but permanently submerged, and it's not coming back. The survivors here aren't waiting for rescue. We're not holding out for things to improve. We're just living day by day on our rooftops, fishing from our balconies, collecting rainwater, repairing our bridges, inspecting our buildings for signs of collapse, burying our dead when the heat or the disease or the despair claims another victim. Some people talk about moving inland, about abandoning the towers and trying to reach higher ground, but that's its own kind of death sentence. The roads are gone, submerged or washed out, and traveling by boat through this toxic swamp is dangerous and often fatal. The evacuation centers are overcrowded, disease-ridden, running out of supplies, turning people away at gunpoint when they arrive desperate and sick and starving.
At least here we have shelter, however precarious. We have a community, however small. We have systems for survival that work most of the time. Leaving means giving up everything we've built, everything we've learned, every relationship and routine and bit of knowledge that keeps us alive. Gambling it all on the possibility that somewhere else is better, when every report we hear suggests everywhere else is just as bad or worse. The nights are the hardest, when the heat finally breaks a little and you can think clearly enough to remember what you've lost, who you've lost, the life you used to have before the water came. I lie on my rooftop shelter and look up at stars that are brighter now without the light pollution, and I think about my family who evacuated north, who I haven't heard from in 8 months, who might be alive or might be dead, and I have no way of knowing. I think about my apartment that's 30 feet underwater now, about the possessions I left behind thinking I'd be back in a week, about the photos and books and accumulated objects of a lifetime that are now covered in silt and barnacles and slowly dissolving in salt water. I think about restaurants I used to eat at, beaches I used to walk on, streets I used to drive down, a city I used to love that exists now only in memory and in the corroding ruins that poke above the waterline. But mostly I think about the future, about how much worse this is going to get, about what happens when this tower collapses, or when we run out of food, or when disease sweeps through our community, or when the social bonds that hold us together finally fray and break. I think about the children who were born here after the flood, who will grow up never knowing anything but rooftops and bridges and toxic water, who will think this is normal, who will have no frame of reference for how different life used to be. I think about whether humanity can survive this, whether we can adapt fast enough to keep up with changes that are happening faster than evolution designed us to handle, whether civilization can persist in a world where the coastlines are constantly shifting and the weather is increasingly violent, and the resources we need to survive are increasingly scarce. The water doesn't care about our plans or our hopes or our belief that we're special, that we're different, that we'll somehow be spared the consequences of decisions made decades ago by people who knew better but chose profit over preservation, convenience over sustainability, short-term gain over long-term survival. The ocean is indifferent to human suffering, will continue rising and falling according to physical laws that existed long before we did, and will continue long after we're gone. Miami was a warning, is a warning, will be remembered as a warning if anyone survives long enough to write the history books. But warnings only matter if people listen, and so far the evidence suggests we're very bad at listening, very good at convincing ourselves that this time will be different, that we'll figure it out, that technology or policy or luck will save us from consequences we can see coming but refuse to prepare for. So that's my message. That's what I want people who still have time to understand. The maps were wrong. The water rises faster than they said, and there's no going back. No reset button, no second chance to do this differently. If you're on the coast, leave now, while you still can, while the roads are still passable, while there are still places inland that haven't been overrun by refugees, while you still have options and choices and some small measure of control over your fate. Don't make the mistake we made in Miami.
Don't convince yourself it won't be that bad. Don't trust in seawalls or elevation or engineering solutions that can't possibly keep pace with changes that are accelerating faster than anyone predicted. The ocean is coming for every coastal city. We'll swallow them one by one, and the only question is whether you'll be there when it arrives, or whether you'll have the wisdom to leave before the water rises above your door, before the foundations crumble, before you find yourself trapped on a rooftop in a dead city, surrounded by toxic water with no hope of rescue, and nothing to look forward to, except another day of heat and hunger, and the slow, grinding process of trying to survive in a world that's become actively hostile to human life. The Great Flood took Miami in January 2030, but it started decades earlier, with decisions and emissions and policies that set this catastrophe in motion. We had time to stop it, time to slow it, time to prepare, and we wasted all that time arguing and denying and pretending the laws of physics would make an exception for us, because we're humans and we're special, and surely the universe wouldn't let something this terrible happen to us. But the universe doesn't care. The ocean doesn't negotiate. And the bill for a century of carbon emissions and coastal development and willful ignorance has come due with interest. Miami is paying that bill now, drowning in installments, dissolving slowly into a sea that was always going to reclaim this limestone shelf. And every other coastal city is next in line, wondering if they'll be spared, when all the evidence suggests they won't be. They can't be, because this is physics, not politics. This is chemistry, not economics. And neither physics nor chemistry can be lobbied or bribed or convinced to make an exception for our convenience.